Welcome to Put You On Game,
where you leave with more than you came, presented by Swish Cultures. We're your hosts, Milaan and Ashten.
First off, shout out to Figueroa 8 for this beautiful space.
And today we're joined by two powerful voices. Walter Thompson Hernandez, director of Shooting Guards, the new documentary on Netflix.
And Rasheed Hazzard, former NBA coach and scout. So sit back, relax,
and enjoy the show.
Thank you guys for coming.
Yes,
the documentary was absolutely amazing. And yeah, I would love to just kind of jump right into it. First off, when you guys came into the building, as the audience is going to see, you guys automatically knew each other. It was love.
Love, good energy, yes.
How did you guys even know each other? What was the background behind that?
That's a great question, man. So the first time I saw Coach Hazzard, I call him Coach Hazzard, I don't call him Rasheed. Coach Hazzard, I met him, I was in high school, I was like 14, maybe 14, 15, and he was on crutches. And he had just had knee surgery, and I think he was like 23 or 24. He was a young coach, and I was kind of coming off like, having kind of a rough time or like a rough sort of childhood sort of stuff. And I met him, and the rest is history. It was really coming out of my high school. He was my high school basketball coach and college coach as well.
Do you remember the first time you met him?
I do remember my first interaction. I was on crutches. The last of my total 6 knee operations that I've had over the course of my short playing career. Walter was a kid who wanted to be a basketball player. He wanted to be a varsity player. Said he had aspirations of playing in college. And this is just our first conversation. And I'm a person that I go off of feel. Mm-hmm. And I looked him in his eyes, and I could see that he wanted it. And that he wanted something different from whatever he was getting at that moment. And then when I come to find out later, he was a struggling student at the time, probably maybe a 0.9 GPA at that moment. And so I made a deal with him. He would have to play junior varsity, but if he got at least a 2.0 at the 20-week grade period, I'd move him up to varsity. Mm-hmm. He got a 2.0. I moved him up to varsity.
You locked in?
That's the average.
Yeah, I moved him up. I moved him up to varsity right after that. And it's funny, he was our 4-man because I had a small team. We were terrible. We were 0-16 in the league. We were really bad. So he was our starting 4-man, and he wasn't allowed to shoot 3-pointers. That was another part of our deal. Mm-hmm. And he was a mid-range assassin though. He probably averaged like 16 points a game.
That's fire.
Really came into his own, and then. You fast forward to the next 2 seasons, he was probably one of the 2 or 3 best 3-point shooters in the country going forward. And if nobody believes me, all y'all go and ask Paul Pierce about Walter Thompson Hernandez and if that boy can get a bucket. So that's our kind of origin story. And then he's just been family ever since. Any family functions, birthdays, my mom's birthday, dad's birthday, nephew's birthdays, he's there, even to this day. And so it's remained just, I'm only 10 years older than him, but he's always felt like the son I don't have. I don't have any kids, but he was like a son to me and always will be.
Okay, that's beautiful.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
I actually love that.
I love that breakdown.
And then for you guys to now work together on this film, like how was that experience? How was that experience like?
Yeah, I think it was like this interesting sort of like full circle moment, right? Yeah. Where it's like how often do like our professional and personal lives sort of like merge and intersect, And I think for me, like taking on this opportunity with Netflix and this film kind of felt like, who else but me, right? Just in terms of like personal relationship to Coach Hazzard, like having close friends and people who knew Javaris and Gilbert and Nick Young, who's a friend of mine, So it was just like all these sort of worlds like kind of overlapping, and it felt really special. It felt like it was like I think Coach Hazzard is like one of the best speakers I've ever heard speak. Mm-hmm. I've interviewed a lot of people in my life, and I think he's one of the best. So he was like my first sort of like I was like, oh, okay, I'm working on this movie, Coach Hazzard, and it worked out really well.
Man, that kind of brings me to my next question. Like, what drew you to this movie, and what was the process like to even be a part?
Yeah, it was like a process that preceded me. Like I didn't come up with this story. This was my original idea. They have been working on this movie for about 8 to 10 years, And so what kind of happened was like Javaris gets released last year, you know, and that sort of like kind of greenlit the process, right? Like it was like, you know, there were like plans to make this movie without Javaris, but it just would have felt incomplete, right? So Javaris gets released and kind of like Netflix kind of greenlights it, and there were like other directors who were kind of up for it. I think they kind of chose me based on like, you know, background, but also like story and you know, and all these sort of reasons, right? So I got selected, I got hired, and it was about a year and a half, you know, of not just research and interviews, but just editing and sort of thinking about like how to best position this story, right? A really complicated story, a story about friendship, right? Hope, redemption, decisions, right? And so, you know, we were in Los Angeles, upstate New York, Peter Vesey, in DC, Atlanta, and it was just it was a great process, you know, a really great team, two producers and editors, and it felt really nice.
That's fire. First off, me and Milaan watched it, and we were so locked in.
No,
we didn't know.
It was so
Yeah,
good.
we didn't
It
know
was so
any
good.
of the background really. It was kind of like whatever the media perceived. We kind of, you know,
First, all of us.
all
Yeah.
of us,
All of us,
yeah.
for sure.
So we really liked how everything was broken down within the
Yeah,
film.
it was so good.
It was good.
And we were talking about like you were, and for him to say too, like one of his best interviews, like you're speaking, and you were we were talking like you were a main part of the documentary. Like, how did that come about? How did the conversations come about of just like having, you know, we were saying like you had a major role in the film.
I mean, first of all, I'm so proud of just Walter and this accomplishment, but all his accomplishments. It's like, again, it's like a proud dad moment that I've never had. And so, really amazing that he's been able to present it in the way he has. And then for me, it was funny. Walter and I text Walter. I think I was in Africa at the time. I texted him after one of my games. You know, I was excited. We had just won my first game, matter of fact. Text with him. He calls me back and FaceTimes me. He never FaceTimes me. So FaceTimes
He
me.
was serious, huh?
I'm also old school. You
Yeah,
know? Like,
yeah.
I'm a phone call. I'm not FaceTime.
You're like,
Right.
So he FaceTimes me and we're talking a little bit, and then he's like, "Coach, you won't guess who I'm with." And he shows Javaris Crittenton. And so I'm like, I had been asking about Crit all these years. I would see Paul Hewitt, his college coach, often. He works for the Clippers, and I always ask about Javaris because I was just genuinely concerned about him and what he went through. And so I just started to talk to Javaris. Like, I was really excited. Like, we talked, and that conversation turned into me talking to him about not playing in that first game, because we never had to have got to have that conversation because he got traded, you know, and I was on the road advanced scouting, so I didn't run into him. So, you know, all these years later, we're finally having that conversation, 15 years later. And I think what I said to him, it was meaningful, because I think that was a source of pain for him in his life that he had no understanding of. And so I think one of the producers was in the background listening, and, you know, Walter got back on the phone. He's like, "We got to have you on this and get your insight as to, you know, just what this story is all about." And that's really how it came about. It was a FaceTime call between two old school dudes who don't use FaceTime.
That's like, so just like this, just the stars all aligning, and that's beautiful that all you guys got to come back and like really work together, because I feel like it was meant for you guys to make this together, and that's beautiful in a sense.
Exactly. And to your point, Coach, that kind of segues us into the portion of us going down and visiting crypto. First off, do you guys like, what do you prefer, Staples or
You
crypto?
still call it Staples?
Yeah.
It's
Staples?
Staples.
It's always Staples, right?
As long as I got these
Hey,
rings,
yo,
it's
you
always
got
gonna
the
be
ring
Staples.
on?
That's a flex.
It's always gonna be Staples.
Yeah.
They can do crypto,
Yeah,
whatever
it
they
don't-
want.
it don't
Staples.
go right.
It's always gonna be Staples. Much respect to crypto, but it's always Staples.
See, I love how you laid it
Yeah.
out.
Okay, so we were talking about how our biggest takeaway from the film was like how one decision can really affect your life. essentially. So how were you able to like navigate showing like the decision making or the weight of the moment without like villainizing anyone? I thought that was like you did a really good job of just like there was no finger pointing. It was just telling the story but without villainizing. How were you able to do that successfully?
Yeah. I think it was like such a complicated story where there's no like kind of like clear cut sort of victim except for Julian Jones and her family, right? Like I think both Javaris and Gilbert kind of made, you know, decisions that were unwise that you ask them today they don't feel great about, right? But I think it's you know, every story is so complicated, right? And even Javaris, right, who unfortunately took this mother's life, but you know, Javaris also suffered at the hands of others, right? He was a young player in the NBA, incredibly vulnerable, right? Both because of the NBA and Gilbert's antics. So it was, and also at the same time, you know, Gilbert too, right? Is a complicated person, right? Somebody who, you know, at this point in his life, kind of recognizes how much he's grown, but you know, at that time, kind of was also sort of, I think, deserving of as much grace and care as anybody else in the movie.
Yeah. I feel like, being a previous athlete myself, and, we're here at LA Live, right by Crypto/Staples. And when Javaris came to LA, you were one of the first to, even greet him and work out with him. And him not being able to play his first game, I know how that feels. When you get the family calling you saying, yo, what's going on? What's the problem? So can you talk about how athletes go through that mental, physical, emotional, I would say low-key trauma, and you as in a coaching position, how do you balance still being there for the athlete as well as still trying to make sure you do your job correctly?
Yeah, I mean that's the tough part I think about coaching is you have to strike that balance. But I think at the end of the day, right is right and wrong is wrong, and as long as you stay on that core principle, you don't have to have an allegiance to a player or to the team. You just want to see the right thing done by everybody, and I think that can happen. And I think for Javaris, having spent that time with him when he first came to us and seeing his spirit, and then seeing the shift in his spirit when we had to work out the day after that game he didn't play, you felt a shift. And that's why I said what I said in the documentary. There was a shift that you could feel and see in his emotional state. And it was hard to see, but it was something that he had to go through. And he had to figure out a way to get to the other side of it so that he could, get to the point he's at now. He could have gotten to this point that he's at now without murdering that young lady, right? He could have gotten there by just accepting the space he was in, right, and overcoming. And just sometimes you just have to persevere through adversity. That's what sports teaches you. Even though you're an NBA player and you're making all this money, you're still learning. And so he didn't fight through that adversity the way he probably should have and probably would now in the state he's in. And so it was just like I said, it's an American tragedy as far as I'm concerned. Similar to, Aaron Hernandez and these guys that go down the wrong path. Yeah. It's tough to see, especially when you have a connection to that person. It's a personal thing for me.
And even like for both of you, after watching the film, like what do you hope that people, especially like young Black men, like take away from this film?
The importance of dealing with your mental health. But I think more than anything is our emotional maturity, right? Somebody talks about you, says things, right? It's not a fight. You don't pull a gun. You don't pull a knife, right? It's just emotional maturity. I think that was two emotionally immature young men who, when they look back and reflect now, know that they would have handled that totally differently. So I know Walter did a great job. And I don't know that was his message, but that was something that I hope these young, especially athletes, take from it is just emotional maturity. It's really, really important.
What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, that's a great point. I think it's like both emotional maturity and it's also like the effects of our decisions, and also ultimately how important it is for like a lot of these like young athletes, have the right support system around them. Like I think about Javaris, and Coach Hazzard said it so wisely, right? Coming to Los Angeles was just not a good fit. And I wonder if Javaris had more familial, more emotional maybe support from the Lakers, right? If there was conversations around mental health, conversations around what he needed, like would any of this happen, right? So it's probably part of a larger conversation about how even though somebody's like an NBA player, they're still ultimately incredibly vulnerable, right? Like regardless of how much money you make, someone like Javaris and Gil made decisions that affected them greatly,
Yeah, absolutely. And did you know Javaris and Gil before?
I grew up admiring Gilbert, right? Like big fan. And Javaris I kind of knew because, we're also kind of the same age. Like I knew him as a Laker, but I didn't know him personally, no. But I had a teammate when I was playing overseas who was college teammates with Javaris and a family friend, Paul Hewitt, who was also kind of his coach. So I had a somewhat relationship with him, yeah.
How did you get them to open up to you and be so vulnerable? Because this story is really tough to kind of
like
break down.
trust and all that. Like, how do you get to that point with these people?
That's a great question. I think before becoming a filmmaker, I was a New York Times journalist for a lot of years, right? So like I've interviewed thousands of people before, and I think my experience as a former professional basketball player and Division I athlete like kind of does something like a lot of filmmakers who make these movies like didn't play basketball before, Like I saw myself in both Gilbert and in Javaris, and I think I was able to connect with them in a way where like the sort of facade and the performance was like erased, and it was just me having a conversation about basketball and life. And I think, I'm really good at interviewing people, right? I make people feel comfortable and vice versa, and it comes out in the movie.
Absolutely. How did you feel when you were getting interviewed by someone that you knew and you felt close? Because sometimes that dynamic, you could be like, da-da-da-da-da, and you open it up a little bit too much, and then in the post-edit, we're like, we got to take that out. It might be a little too much. So how was that for you?
I mean, for me, it was just another proud moment, and I had no concerns because I trust Walter like I would trust, like his last name is Hazzard.
Yeah,
I mean,
sure.
I would, anything he asks me, I'm going to answer it honestly and openly because I know he's not going to ever put me in a position to make me look bad or put me in a compromised position because
Absolutely,
he wants what I want for him, for me.
That's right.
And I know that, and I felt that from the day I met him. So it was easy to trust him.
That's great.
And we're talking about like the process of making a documentary. What advice would you give to like young creatives who want to tell a story but may not have like the connections that you have in the spaces that you're in? Like, how would you tell them to get started?
Yeah, I think everything takes a long time. Like I've probably been working on this for the past 20 years of my life. Like it's not just a year or two. I think it takes a really long time, and so I think part of it is patience, and I think thinking about like what sort of connections and access we have to stories around us. I think for a lot of us the point of contention is always access, right? Like what access do we have into these worlds? And if we really look deeply and look around us, a lot of times we don't know how much we know or like who we know or who Coach Hazzard, right? It's usually around us, and I think we don't think it is.
Yeah. I think too, my brother, he played pro, and that transition from him going to playing pro into doing, what we do now with Switch Cultures and media, it wasn't a direct path. To this day, he still hasn't said he retired. So like, and I respect it because I feel like it's way harder to, come to grips with trying to figure out what to do post your basketball career. So what's some advice that you can give to some hoopers right now that are either overseas trying to figure out what they want to do, or just some that are actively playing and just preparing them for post basketball?
That's such a great question. I played overseas 3 years. I'm half black, half Mexican, so I played all over Latin America as like a local, right? So for me, like I kind of knew after year 3 that I wasn't gonna make like the league, or and didn't want to be like that kind of old basketball player, right? Who kind of had to play basketball to support his family. So I think for me, my mom is a professor, dad's a professor, right? So I was already kind of thinking about academia and research and things like that. So it was kind of like a segue. I bought a camera with like my first check that I got playing basketball, and I would just take pictures, and I would like wherever we would travel to, I'd like talk to people and take notes in like a little notepad. So I was kind of already thinking about it, but it is hard, and I feel like back in those days, the whole like more than an athlete thing wasn't around, right? So for a lot of us, right, there's like a stigma around being a basketball player. It's like, you're a basketball player, you're a scholar, you're a filmmaker, like all these sort of divisions. And I think for me, like my first years now after playing basketball, I was like, damn, I know I'm interested in this, but like basketball has only been in my resume, right? I didn't have internships, I didn't have any of that, so it was kind of hard for the first couple of years. I think it was hard to watch basketball too, right? Because it was so central to my life, you know. Right, yeah. Like for the first 2 years, I couldn't watch basketball, you know, because it was so hard and I missed it so much. But then it's like you learn that like what we learn playing basketball, you know, can apply to anything we do, right? You know, the discipline, the hard work, the like going hard as hell, you know, and I feel like for me it kind of carries over now.
And like you being coach around the game for as long as you have, and like have you seen that the difference from when you first got into it versus like now these players are saying like, you know, they are more than an athlete? Have you seen that, and is that something that you instill in them?
Yeah, that's a big part of my philosophy just as a coach, and it started with, you know, guys like Walter. I always, when I would work with him, we do our development. He'd make a mistake, or if he'd come late, I would always tell our players, basketball is a reflection of life, right? You come late to practice, you're probably going to be late to work. If your guy is going late to class, you probably, you know, that's going to be a habitual thing. So we're creating and developing our habits for success just through the work we're doing to be great at basketball. And so that reflection, if we respect and appreciate it, you know, the sky's the limit for what you can do once your career is done. You know, but it is a tough transition because everything is so regimented when you're a player, right? You don't really, they take the thinking out of it for you for the most part, and they give you these schedules, your whole year is planned out, and so it's really, you know, that's the toughest part of it, is figuring out what to do with your time. Yeah. And so guys that are coming from overseas, or, you know, guys that are playing in college now that aren't going to make it to the NBA or not going to go play overseas, they just have to understand that the work ethic that got them that scholarship, that made them great, will also make them great at whatever they pursue next. And whatever they pursue next doesn't have to be their final destination, right? Walter pursued photography. He ends up being a director. But he immersed himself in it just like he did basketball, and he put the work in. And that's what's going to pay off for you. You don't think you have to find the right thing right away. Just start working toward it, and just and stay positive and do the things you did to get yourself to the level you're at as a player, and it'll all work out.
First off, appreciate you guys for walking with us.
Yeah.
We not washed yet, you know. Don't claim that, coach. Don't claim that. Right. On our way back, we was kind of talking about the media space. You know, we were all athletes before, and being able to be in the space now is kind of like, how do we enter without stepping on like the typical journalism toes, and kind of transitioning and transcending the space? So how was that like for you?
For sure. I think it's been interesting because, like, you know, I didn't go to film school, but I work in film now. And then before that, I didn't go to journalism school, but I was at the New York Times, right? And I think for me, there was like a lot of insecurity, right, around like, how am I in this place? I didn't go to this school, didn't go to that school. So I was kind of like, you know, insecure, didn't feel as confident as I maybe should have. And then I think there's like a moment where, like, again, you know, so much of what we learn through like sports and basketball and volleyball, right, are things that, you know, you can't really teach somebody, right? And all the sort of like technicalities and gatekeeping that exists to like keep people out, you know, we can learn all the technical stuff, right? We can learn that. It's on YouTube, it's in books, right? But like the spirit stuff, the like hard work stuff, the like being locked in stuff, you can't really teach that, right? And if we have that, and a lot of us do, and if we find a lane where it's like, all right, you know, like I'm an artist, right? I'm gonna take the like basketball stuff and I'm gonna apply that, because a lot of people, you know, who work in art, who work in film, like wake up at 10 a.m. you know, and start working at 1 p.m. I was talking to Coach Hazzard yesterday, right? Like, I'm editing my next movie right now. My first break is at 9 a.m. I'm up at 6:30 every day, you know?
Yeah.
My lunch is at 10, right? So I take that from Coach Hazzard. I take that from, like, Kobe stories with, like, Coach Hazzard, right? And that's the energy, you know? And I feel like once we apply that to whatever we do, it's kind of game over.
Man.
And that's the way, I think, for Walter, you know, to piggyback on what he's saying, you know, that was part of the design, and picking him up at 5:30 in the morning on school days and going to the beach and running, then going to the gym and getting shots, and then it's like, okay, now it's time to start your day and go to work. Right? But we did the work that it takes for you to be great at this thing you say you want to be great at, and then he just took that energy and just segued it into everything that he's done since he's gotten out of basketball. And that what we were talking about over at LA Live, that's what all these players or athletes, not even just players, all these athletes who are gonna move out of being athletes into something else, that's, if you can bottle that, that's gonna be the key to your next step into your success. That's it.
I think we were talking about that last week with the Sinners movie and Ryan Coogler, and how he was saying that he was like, I used to have 12-hour days. Like, I'm coming in here, like, this is nothing for me. Like, like, they're all tired. Like, I'm applying what I've learned as an athlete. And we also talked about, like, Ryan, he had a teacher who kind of, like, told him, like, saw him out, kind of said, like, you looked him in his eyes and you knew. And Ryan had a teacher who said, like, I think you should really consider going into film. Like, I see it in you. Can you guys speak on just being, like, having an impact on somebody at such a young age? You don't know what that can do for somebody, seeing something in them that they can't see in themselves. Like, can you speak on, like, how just, like, Coach, other people in your life, like, just made an impact on you, and, like, now you being here, like, today, like, now, all these accomplishments you had? Can you just speak on that?
You just look so proud. Like,
I mean, I got something to say, man. Like, it's a strong statement, but if it wasn't Coach Hazzard, like, I wouldn't be here right now physically, right? I mean that. Like, I'm not just saying that because it, like, sounds interesting or sounds emotional. Like, that's the truth. Like, I was like in these streets, high school dropout, incarcerated, all these things, right? So, like, the mentorship, and, like, love and community and all that, family means so much to a lot of people. And I wouldn't be here if it wasn't Coach Hazzard, for sure.
Coach, how does that make you feel hearing that?
I mean, it's humbling, because as a coach, that's what you set out to do, was have that kind of impact on people. This wasn't a thing. This was never about money. This was never about anything but the impact you could have on young people. So hearing that is very rewarding, because that's what you get into this business for. And I think hearing that from Walter, and then thinking about where I've been since I coached him, in terms of coaching college and doing MBA and overseas and all the different things I've done, I've taken that same approach, even though I was dealing with men.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's really just about, coaching is about making sure the guys that you're in charge of and that you're charged with helping be great, the first responsibility you have as a coach to make sure they know you care. You have to care to get the best out of people. And caring doesn't mean you kiss their ass or you do things, beneath, the surface. But caring just means that you show up for them every day, you prepare, you do all the things that you're telling them they have to do.
Absolutely.
And then once you show somebody you care, sky's the limit with what you can help them accomplish.
And just like how you have affected players' lives in such a positive way, has there ever been, like, a player that really affected you and, like, made you a better person? Or had you think, like, was there a player?
A lot of them. I can name several NBA guys Ron Artest really had a big impact on me in my time working with him. Huge impact on me. Lamar Odom, obviously Kobe, just the relationship we had, the connection we had, Derek Fisher. But I would say if there's one athlete that I'm going to name that had that impact on me, it was Austin Hatch. Austin Hatch was the young man that survived 2 plane crashes. And he went to Loyola High School with one of my best friends, Jamal Adams, as the head coach. And my nephew Max Hazzard was there. And he called me one day and said, "You want to be a part of a miracle?" Yeah, why not? I'm not doing anything today. So I go over to Loyola, and introduces me to Austin, and they tell me the story about the plane crashes he survived. And he was having my dad had a stroke in '96. And when I was coaching Walter, I wasn't a teacher. I was taking care of my dad throughout the day. So I would take care of my dad from the morning till about 2 o'clock. between me and my brother Ansar, my brother Jalal, my brother Khalil and Yaqub, but I had that part of the day. And so, I was never a teacher. It was always coaching and caring, and being there for these young guys. And so, when I hear Walter say those kind of things, and then I think back to Austin Hatch, and I think, he had an impact on me because of the adversity he had to overcome. We were just talking about overcoming adversity. How much more adversity can you overcome than having a traumatic brain injury? And his brain injury was similar to my dad's. Mm-hmm. So the problems he was having were very similar to the things my dad was facing. So once we started working and he started to make improvements, because this kid just was not going to not play basketball ever again. All he wanted to do was get back on the court and make one shot. Yeah. That's what he kept telling me. Coach, I just want to get back in the game, and I want him to call my number. I want to come off, and I want to knock one more down. Mm-hmm. Okay, we can do that. And so we worked for about maybe 5 months, and then they were going to play, I believe it was Sherman Oaks, Notre Dame, and they were pretty bad back then. They weren't as good as they are now. And I didn't go to the game because I knew that might be the game that he was going to get in. They put him in the game. Jamal calls a play for him. They run him off like 9 screens to get him open. He comes off to the right wing and drains it all net. And, I wasn't there, so everybody's calling me from the game and telling me, Austin made this shot. And so I wanted him to have that moment without me being there to take any attention away from him. That was just really about him. The work we did was the work. And I got to have that moment by myself. And man, I just couldn't stop crying because I was so happy for him. I mean, I get chills thinking about it now. It was just, you win championship rings, you have great young men like Walter that you've had an impact on their life, but Austin changed my life and changed a lot of my perspective on just how I went about things and how I dealt with adversity and, no woe is me and feeling down and all those things. I mean, he really taught me a lot about life, and he was a 19-year-old kid. But that goes back to something that I often talk about is I have the beginner's mindset. I can learn from anybody. I learn from my little nephews that are, 5. My little nephew Amari, who's 6 years old, I'm learning from him now. Yeah. Because, we can never lose that beginner's mindset because that's our connection. For sure. Everybody wants to be heard. When you have that beginner's mindset, people know you're listening, and everybody just wants to be heard.
Yeah, that kind of even brings me into a question. We talk a lot about mental health in the sports realm, and we always kind of talk to the athletes, which I feel like it should be prioritized. But in this instance, can we talk about coaches' mental health, right? I don't think anybody has really talked about it. Like, I know when I was in the Clippers press room, I remember I was just kind of even giving Ty Lue his flowers, like, look, all the coaches talk so highly of you. How does that make you feel? But from a coach perspective, how is it for you? You're taking on so many different personas each and every day. You have to constantly teach. What is that from a coach's perspective? How are you guys handling that?
For me, that's just a part. That's the job. And so you have to come into coaching with your mental health intact, or you can't. You really can't help these young people get to where they want to get to. So as a coach, you really have to continuously be working on your mental health. One of the things I learned working under Phil was, meditation. And so I still, to this day, use some of those breathing techniques, in certain situations. And so I think, for us as coaches, we have to be proactive about maintaining our mental health. Most coaches are married, and, I know their wives are a huge source of helping them, kind of just stay even keeled. The guys that I know who have, very happy and productive marriages. And so I think that's important. But the mental health aspect as far as coaching, you can't come into this and not be right up here, because you can't help these young people. And that's, I dealt with that. My brother passed away a couple years ago. I took time off and I had job offers, And one GM asked me, he's like, hey, Haz, what's going on? And I just told him, I said, the space that I'm in now, I can't give you the best of me. And for the amount of money you're offering to pay me to do that job, you deserve nothing but my best. Mm-hmm. And those players need my best to get to where they want to get to, that next contract, that championship. So it's a heavy responsibility on us to not put ourselves in that position if we're not mentally ready. And I think you saw Ty Lue step away a couple times with different things he's dealing with physically. A lot of times what we're dealing with physically as coaches comes from what we're dealing with mentally. It's that impact, and so
a lot of stress.
A lot.
It's a lot of stress. Like and from even a player perspective, who do you guys even talk to? Because a lot of the community, I don't know, therapy, bring up therapy. Nah, I don't need therapy. Right. So what would you guys recommend, and what has helped you guys navigate that space?
Sure. I think therapy does help. I've been in therapy multiple times. It's important to talk to people, somebody who has like an objective sort of ear. I think our family and friends are beautiful, but like sometimes you need to talk to somebody who isn't as invested in your past or in you, who has like kind of like an outsider's perspective, right? I think that's really important. I don't know. I'm really low key. Like I said that earlier.
You
but
did.
He don't be outside.
Yeah. Like I'll be gardening. I'll be planting trees in my house. Taking walks and stuff.
Yeah, you sound very zen.
Yeah, I'll be fishing and stuff. I'm low key, man. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think I think therapy is actually is good. I think we need to continue to push that, especially in our community. But I think we've also, with each generation that goes by, we've gotten further and further from people having a relationship with God as well. Mm-hmm. And I think those two kind of go hand in hand. I don't care what your religion is. I don't care what you choose, what you decide, but there has to be some spirituality to go along with, dealing with your mental health and talking to, therapists or whatever. I think having a spiritual foundation is also important, and I think we're getting further and further away from that. Mm-hmm. The more social media and all these other things become so prevalent. Mm-hmm. And so I think we need to also, in our community, get some focus back to just be spiritual. Like I said, I don't care what your religion is, just have a spiritual foundation.
Amen. For sure. Amen. We keep it. No, but like you said, just like taking care of yourself. You can't pour from an empty cup. So that's you have to put yourself first. Right. Yeah. Well, first of all, I want to say thank you guys because I've learned a lot. I'm honored to hear what you guys have to say. So that's beautiful. We keep it a little lighter, but end it on a lighter note.
I just have one quick question before we kind of end it. There's been like a lot of talk between the media and athlete divide, right? Because me and Milaan, we be talking about it a lot. Because we were in front of the camera at one point, and now we're behind. So I guess we're in front of the camera now. Right. But just when everything is positive, the team is going through good stuff, we always hear, "Good job!" Like you guys are doing great. But as soon as something kind of is on the decline, the journalists are writing certain things, and then, athletes have to speak up for, different moments. How do you guys think we can bridge that gap where media is still able to cover appropriately, as well as still be able to state the facts without, harming or putting any athlete in a weird position?
Yeah, I think it's like a part of like a broader story, right? Because I think like I grew up in an era, right, where media was weaving together these beautiful narratives about sports, right? Mm-hmm. And about athletes and about teams, and there were like these narrative arcs that got us all excited about following sports, right? And media personalities, and I think, there's been a shift, right? Where it's like now a lot of these sort of like narratives around sports and athletes are kind of gone, and it seems like really divisive and petty, right? In a way that like this doesn't feel interesting often. There's also something great, right? Which is that like athletes now have their own platforms, and I think that's like also a great thing, and it's also complicated, right? Because we're also kind of missing some of these like, beautifully woven, crafted narratives that I kind of grew up with. So I think ultimately, it's about like, what's the story, who's it serving, what's it for, what's being said, and how it's being said. I think like, you know, somebody can criticize somebody, but if it's done from like a place of love and respect, right, it's cool, right? I just think sometimes that's kind of missing, and a lot of athletes, you know, to their credit, aren't putting up with it, and like I support that. You know, I was an athlete too, who kind of grew up in an age where we didn't have the like social media platforms to like talk our shit essentially, you know, and now there's like button heads around like this old guard of like media and this new guard who like doesn't have, you know, the sort of limitations and barriers that like these old journalists sort of had, right? They had to go to journalism school, they had to put in their work, they had to do all those things, and like that's beautiful that they experienced that, but like that's not the era that we're living in now, and I think people have to sort of make sense of that.
Yeah, it's beautifully said.
I think it can improve, and you said the key word. I think both sides need to have more respect for the other's journey. If we just keep it about respect and treating a person how you would want to be treated, and just do things above board, I don't think we'll have all these issues and arguments from, you know, the old guard with the new media, as they call it. I think it's just like the old school players arguing with the current players, right? About who's better and all this stuff. I think it doesn't matter, right? The game, we all say we love the game, so we should all be out here trying to protect the game, right? Respect the game, protect the game, right? If we keep it about the game and not about us as individuals, right? It's become too driven by individuals, right? We've lost. I'm gonna say that I watched the NFL. One thing the NFL has, right? Nobody's bigger than the game. Nobody, right? They will get you out of there quick, fast, in a hurry. If your skill set, your skill level is no longer elite, they're gonna knock you down to the next level, right? And so, I think we have to get away from this tit for tat, you know, this pissing match, as they call it, right? Of who's better, what's the better way. Why don't we just respect each other in the space that we're in, all right, and figure out a way to coexist.
Hey.
Yeah, this is alignment at its finest.
Because I was literally we were just talking about that, and I was just like, bro, like if all of us love the game of basketball, like why don't we celebrate it? Like we get to watch these players at the highest level. Like we're spoiled. We're spoiled as NBA fans. Like we as just basketball fans, we're spoiled, and I never understand the constant just nagging, crying, complaining. Like when we're literally blessed with such high level basketball.
Yeah, and then it's like you know you hear like some of the new players often say, well, that guy couldn't play now. You know, you'll say Wilt Chamberlain or somebody, but my argument is always, you can say that, but you also have to take into consideration, what if you took Wilt Chamberlain and you put him in today's game with all the sports science, the weightlifting, the nutrition, all the
real
stuff.
Basketball shoes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Not Chuck.
Start there.
He did that shit in some clogs, right? He scored 100, and you know, so that's where the respect thing comes in. Instead of looking down on them, respect them for doing it with the tools they had.
That's right.
Instead of saying you couldn't do it now. No, say, well, damn, what if that dude had the tools that we have available to us? Man, he would be this. Let's talk about it that way instead of trying to tear each other down. That's my only request from my brothers in sports in general.
I love that.
Let's just stop that narrative.
I love
Period.
that.
I love that. Yeah, that's a great way to say it.
That was great.
And then what were we saying? Okay, wider question, Walter. If you could direct a doc on any athlete or cultural figure, who would it be?
Oh man, a documentary about any athlete?
Any athlete or cultural figure, anyone you.
Gosh, it could be any sport.
Yes.
Oh man, I don't know. That's a tough question. Like my mind goes to like 10, 30 different people.
Top three. What you
I mean, I don't know. Like I think like there's been so many like great basketball documentaries. I know the best basketball documentary of all time for me is Hoop Dreams, right? I think Hoop Dreams is like, it's like ultimate goals in terms of like access and spirit and story and characters. I think so for me, you know, it'd be something like in that world, right, where I'm able to have maybe like 10 years to like follow, you know, a person or like a few people. I think that sounds like a dreamy sort of situation. I don't know who it is, but I think it'd be really nice to like have time and space with like somebody.
Anybody now?
No, not right now.
Okay.
I'm biased. I want him to do the Walt Hazzard documentary.
Oh yeah, for sure. 100%.
Yeah,
No fear, we need that. We need that.
Go ahead and put that on the little calendar.
That'd be special.
To kind of wrap it up, because you guys gave us a lot of great gems. Like, this has been so beautifully put together, well said. So appreciate you guys for taking the time to talk with us. If you could put our audience on game about one thing, whether it's life, career, financial, personal, whatever you could think of, and just how to move through the world, what would it be?
I think there's like so many roads that all lead to Rome, right? I think there's like so many ways to like get to where you hope to be one day, and I think like my experience, you know, and my path is like super non-linear, you know, and I think for me, that's probably like what I kind of live by, and if someone would ask me, they haven't, but if they would, I would say that, you know, I think there's more than one way to get to Rome, you know, and I think that's a really important thing to remember.
For me, it's you gotta believe in yourself. You have to. Jeff Van Gundy used to say it on TV. You have to have a delusional belief in what you can accomplish in life, or in, you know, whatever profession it is. So, you know, it's part of what I drive through these young players, like I tried to do with Walter, and I think it was successful. You have to have the ultimate belief in yourself, and then once you have that belief, then you have to go put the work in to achieve. But if you don't believe, you can't achieve. And I'm really big on that. You have to have that ultimate belief in yourself that there's nothing I can't do, and there's nobody I can't beat. And when you have that, the rest of it's easy. You know, I'm teaching that to my niece plays volleyball at Windward High School right now, Gianna Green.
Okay, Gianna.
And she's learning that right now. You got to have that belief in yourself, and she's developing that, and it'll take you a long way in life. And so, just believe.
Gianna, if you ever need help, let me know. I'm retired. I'm a little washed. Hey, hey. I had a couple knee surgeries, but we still locked in. Well, appreciate you guys again for taking the time to be with us, and congratulations on everything.
Yeah, we want to give you guys your flowers. Your guys' story is inspiring, nonetheless. Like, I'm leaving here inspired and just inspired, and congratulations on all the success for real.
Yeah, congrats. Thank you.